It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. The gut microbiome plays a key role in our overall health and well-being. Researchers are now beginning to understand just how massive a part it plays. Today's guest, Dr. Sabine Hazan, is a gastroenterologist and microbiome expert whose work has shown the connection between gut health and disease. She joins us to discuss the complexities of gut health and what we can do to manage and optimize well-being. Dr. Hazan has published articles in numerous medical journals and is a series editor on the microbiome for Practical Gastroenterology. She's the CEO of Ventura Clinical Trials and the founder and CEO of Progenabiome, a genetic sequencing research laboratory. Welcome, Dr. Hazan. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So, Doctor, let's begin by talking about the microbiome. What is it and why is it so important?
Well, the microbiome is really our health. It's our gut health. It's our immunity. Microbes in our guts really function, have multiple functions, from absorbing sugar to calcium to absorbing, vitamin K. So, the vitamin B. So there's different microbes that are responsible for different things in the gut, right? We tend to think, the gut is really the second brain. So we have to pay attention to what is in the gut that is making it a second brain. And so that's why it's very important. To fight a virus, to fight the next, microbe that comes around, you really need a strong microbiome, a balanced microbiome. And that's essentially the microbes that live inside your gut that create your immunity in a way.
We understand how important it is. What are the biggest influencers of gut health?
Well, I think, in my opinion, our brain controls our gut in a way. So it's kind of interesting because it's a twofold. It's the brain controls the gut, but then the gut controls the brain, So it's a two-way highway almost. So if your stress level, if your thought process is not at peace, then it triggers, your gut, your microbiome to be out of balance, right? So, you've heard of the cases where husband dies and then spouse is completely, depressed, and then all of a sudden herself starts having, problems, health problems. So did that depression of losing a spouse create, and that stress of losing a spouse create a problem that started the disease process, that started killing the microbiome, right? So stressors, you see these kids that have Crohn's disease, and there's always a stressor behind it. Parents got divorced, difficult time at school, exam stressors, pressures. So, stress, in my opinion, is probably the highest onto, what affects our gut. The second thing is obviously what we put in our guts, right? What we put in our bodies, from foods to alcohol to drugs to the wrong products that we think is a good product that's going to help heal our guts, but really is affecting and killing our guts. Think of all the people that basically, listen to the news or follow these influencers that are telling them, oh my God, I took this powder and it really helped me. And they're basically selling a product. And then next thing you know, you're taking on that product, and that product affects you because it just wasn't for you. So, everything we put in our guts, vegetables that are full of pesticides, will affect our guts. And some medications help the microbiome, some medications don't help the microbiome. Some drinks help the microbiome, some drinks don't help the microbiome. So this is the future, is going to be understanding what we put in our bodies and how it affects our bodies is important.
If it plays such an important role, and we're such a society that is stressed out and we're not eating well, and so when you go to the doctor and let's say you have a mental health issue or you're just feeling unwell, why aren't they starting by looking at the gut?
Well, that's a very good question, but here's the problem. The technology of looking at the gut is not there yet. There's a huge PR and a huge marketing on the microbiome. But what do we know so far of the microbiome? Not much. We know that microbes affect our immunity. We know that certain microbes do certain things, but it's not, the research is still, when you look at these trillions of microbes in your gut, we only know about 10,000, and out of those 10,000, we're lucky if we know what 100 bugs do. And out of those hundreds, I can tell you that the majority of people, and especially the physicians that are, not there yet, do not understand that some bugs are actually good guys and bad guys. You take Clostridium difficile, for example, right? Well, Clostridium difficile, we've discovered, is present in, healthy patients, right? But it's not toxic. It doesn't secrete a toxin, right? And yet, Clostridium difficile, when it is allowed to spread in the gut and it becomes a major bacteria in the gut, it will secrete a toxin and create problems of diarrhea. So on its own, with a bunch of microbes, it doesn't really do much, and probably has a function that's really important that we just don't know yet what its function is. But away from its families, away from its group of microbes, it can become toxic and kill a person. Those are the things we don't know. That's why we're at the beginning. Remember, this technology of understanding. First of all, let's go back a bit. How did we get to this? We got to this because we saw something in gastroenterology where we were taking stools from healthy donors and putting them in patients with C. diff, which is a bacteria that, like I said before, causes diarrhea and can kill patients. And we essentially noticed that when we put stools of a healthy donor, the patients, 92 to 99% success, they're fine, they move, they're healed, okay? As opposed to what we used to do before, which was kill the bug, right? We were C. diff, let's give it vancomycin, let's give it flagyl, let's give it this drug, let's do clinical trials on it. And none of it was helping as well as putting stools from a healthy donor to an unhealthy donor. So when that happened, that woke up the GI society. I mean, this is like 30 years in process, right? I mean, when you think of like the first two enemas that were done with poop were Dr. Einsman in the 50s. And then Dr. Barodi took it to the next level in the 80s. And then a whole generation of young doctors like Dr. Neil Stolman, Colleen Kelly, Jessica Allegretti, Zain Kassam, Alex Karutz, Paul Fierstad, Sahil Khanna, all these doctors kind of followed this trend of, hey, what do you mean? I mean, myself included, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, Dr. Stolman said to me, and it's probably more than 20 years right now, but let's say a bunch of decades ago, Dr. Stolman said to me, the future is in the microbiome, in poop, he would say. And I'd say, don't make me play with it because I don't want to touch it. And then, I was doing clinical trials for C. diff. I was actually the number one enroller for pharmaceutical companies to do clinical trials for C. diff. When C. diff, I couldn't fix my patients with flagyl, vancomycin, other antibiotics, or clinical trials, I would have to resort to fecal transplant. And inevitably, the reason I was the top recruiter for these clinical trials is because patients would come to me knowing that they would try the easy thing, which is taking a pill from a pharmaceutical company, and then from there, I would do fecal transplant if the pill didn't work, right? And so, fecal transplant really opened our eyes, and I'm going to call it microbiota transplant because it's microbes that we're transplanting, not poop. We're extracting microbes, we're putting microbes into the colon. When we implant that, we started noticing not only C. diff was improving, but in a couple of patients, like in my case where I did a case of Alzheimer's, the patient was improving with Alzheimer's post-fecal transplant. But of course, these cases don't reproduce that well because there's so many components to the fecal transplant in those diseases, right? To the microbiota transplant. There's, well, what is the patient taking? Did he destroy his microbiome after I implanted it? Is the donor compatible to the patient with this disease? So we're really at the beginning of research. We're just figuring out. And I always say, to understand the microbiome, you have to achieve a cure. Like my case of Alzheimer's, I achieved improvement in the patient. He went from a mini mental status of, 21, 22 to like 29, and he started remembering his daughter's date of birth, etc., post-fecal transplant using the spouse as the donor. Now, obviously, we want to reproduce this case, but here's the problem. There's no money in taking poop from the spouse or from a child. It's not a pharmaceutical product. So nobody's really investing in that kind of research. But in order to understand what went on in Alzheimer's, you really have to understand the microbiome of Alzheimer's. That means you have to start with testing the microbiome. And unfortunately, a lot of testing labs out there are just not validated. So what happens is people go get tested. They think their doctor, they go to these doctors that are doing the stool testing, but even those doctors are not able to help their patients fully. Some of them help them because they have a gut feeling of how to treat the disease, but some of them are not helping them because of the fact that the test that they're doing is not validated. So to go back to your question of why is a doctor not doing this or looking at this, we're at the beginning. We're at the beginning of research. We've just tapped at the surface. We saw a bunch of N's of ones, which is like, one case of Alzheimer's improved, a couple cases of Parkinson's improved, a couple cases of psoriasis. But what made those cases improve is the big mystery and what we need to figure out. And that's where the research is at.
And the problem is that we're not investing in health care, we're investing in sick care. We learned so much through the COVID pandemic. I started following your work at that time, and you taught me a lot about staying healthy through COVID and, things like just being careful in the bathroom, simple things that made so much common sense to me. And I often wonder when we went through that, why we weren't looking at the immune system and trying to stay healthy as opposed to trying to put all of these drugs into our system.
Because we've been following a certain path. When the path has a new technology, then it starts lighting up, and then it starts interesting other doctors to say, wait a minute, maybe this is the wrong path. Think about what happened to me with C. diff, right? For 3 decades, I tried to kill that bug. And I was doing antibiotics, I was doing clinical trials, I was doing monoclonal antibodies, I was doing all sorts of things, only to realize feces from a healthy individual appeased the bug and actually restored the microbiome, restored the gut of this patient. If I didn't see that with my own eyes, I would have still been that girl that keeps her patients on vancomycin forever. So with new technology, with new data, with new research, we have to change. But here's the problem. You're dealing with an industry that is very, to be polite, arrogant. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, those who sit at the top chairs of academic centers or the top chairs of government agencies have developed an arrogance that they believe that their way is the only way. And they have forgotten that science is about asking questions. Science is about pushing the narrative to understand a different way, coming to a different conclusion, looking for other ways, innovations. Innovations happen by defiance in a way. Doctors are not, you've seen on the pandemic, certain doctors were defiant. They didn't want to take the vaccines. They were questioning the vaccines because they were questioning the fast science. How is a new technology safe, for the whole world. I mean,
Right.
we're no longer, when we were talking about the pandemic, and my big problem is because I come from the world of clinical trials where I've helped put drugs to market, right? So when you're in the clinical trial business and you are doing a clinical trial on psoriasis and you're giving it to a small population, you get to see the safety of the drug profile first, but you only realize the true safety of a drug until it's in the market, right? Think of drugs that were, in the market and then all of a sudden got removed from the market because of their safety profile showed that when they got to the market, they were not safe. So that's where I come from in clinical trials. When we're thinking, and that's only a small population of psoriasis, right? So we could say, well, for psoriasis, it's a small population, we'll see. But when you start mandating a vaccine for the whole world, knowing that the Amazon jungle has a different microbiome than the people in New Jersey, than the Amish population, than the Kansas farmer, than the guy in London, than the guy in the venture, in the stock market. All these people have a different microbiome. So to think that we are just going to vaccinate everyone and assume that everybody is the same in their microbiome, that's a huge mistake. That's why I stood up. That's why I started speaking during the pandemic, because what I felt was, why are everybody is different. Everybody has a different microbiome, which, by the way, makes the data and of the microbiome very hard to interpret when you have a patient that is from South Africa versus a person that's from London versus a person that's from the Amazon jungle. Now, if all three of them have a certain problem, they certainly have a different microbiome. So how are you going to find and isolate the problem when they have a different microbiome? You understand the complexity of the problem? It's like I look at kids with autism, for example. We've noticed some kids have similar patterns in the microbiome, but some kids don't. What is going on there, right? Is it because they're different? Is it because they come from different regions of the world? Because definitely the microbiome is different in various areas of the world. So when you see doctors being defiant, that defiance is not that they're trying to create chaos. It's because they're true scientists at heart. Right. A true scientist questions the narrative. A true scientist asks questions. A true scientist understands that he may never find the answers, but will always be seeking for the truth. And that's what we need to remember. And unfortunately, we live in a world where the people that are leading are also very tied with the people that are selling the products. Right. And when that happens, we've biased research. Even me with my lab, which is a genetic research lab, a genetic sequencing research lab, we try to stay research because we want people to understand what we do is research. Right now, you are living in a world where very few diseases have a cure. So everything is research until we have a cure. And here's the thing. Everything in the microbiome space, to understand the microbiome, you need to reach a cure. And to reach a cure, you need to practice the art of medicine, and you need to practice the art of medicine unbiased by money. That's very hard to do. Yeah. And at the same time, you need to bring money into that foundation to kind of keep it going. So because people want fast products, fast profits, think about I've attended a lot of, meetings where people are trying to raise money for companies, etc. And I can tell you my research that I'm doing right now is the bottom of nobody's investing in this, okay? What they will invest in is the next probiotic drink because they can sell a story of, hey, I was sick, and then they could put a bunch of influencers on it and sell the story, sell the marketing. What I do, you can't sell as marketing because it's research.
Well, and it's easier, doctor, for people to take a pill or look for a quick fix rather than make the lifestyle changes that are necessary in order to have gut health and improve the immune system.
100%. My husband's a cardiologist, and he always says, I'm giving people cholesterol pills to allow them to eat the steak and the French fries because they don't want to change their lifestyle of eating the garbage. And I'm not saying steak, I'm just saying garbage steak and garbage French fries that's over fried, over, exposed to whatever. So, people don't want to change their lifestyle. We have a crisis of obesity in this country. Why do we have a crisis of obesity? What are people doing? Think about everything we see in social media is all about food. The cooking shows, the shows that basically are telling you to eat certain foods, and those foods are not necessarily the right foods to eat.
Right. Does it ever scare you, doctor? You were talking about we had this product, this vaccine that was put out, and they pretty much backed themselves into a corner because they had these mandates and they forced people to take something against their will in some cases. And now if the research and the data show that it may not have been the best approach, will anyone ever admit it?
Here's the thing, okay, and I stand on both sides of the vaccines. I don't think, like I stand on both sides with everything because I'm really a scientist at heart, and I try to see both sides of the equation, okay? For the person that is overweight, 300 pounds, and doesn't have access to the doctors that we're treating, for example, and is in central LA and has 3 kids and cannot afford these medications as part of the system where her Medi-Cal is paying her for her health care. That person, who survived COVID, to that person, the vaccine worked. The vaccine didn't give her any problems, right? And unfortunately, this is what we have to put ourselves into the other side. We have to look at the other side and say, for the majority of people, sure, they may have problems down the road, but for the majority of people, they were fine, right? So there is a percentage that is not fine, and we have to look at that, right? For the people that survived, were exposed to the virus, never really had mild symptoms and survived, those people believe they did it right. I think somewhere in the middle is the answer, whereby you go, well, maybe it wasn't for all. Maybe the idea that public health has, that you have to vaccinate everyone to get rid of a virus, is maybe not the right idea when it comes to viruses, right? Think about what a virus does is it mutates. Is it a good idea to vaccinate a virus that's mutating? You'd have to vaccinate the whole world at the same time, exactly at 11 o'clock in the morning, and then make sure, and then maybe that virus may disappear. But the problem is, by the time the vaccine comes around and you vaccinated everyone at 11 o'clock, the virus has already mutated. And that's the problem with vaccinations of viruses. It doesn't work because viruses, the simple property of a virus is to mutate. So that's it. That's something that, it's simple to explain. This is why we've never had a vaccine for Epstein-Barr virus or even for HPV. It doesn't work. The virus mutates. Herpes, we don't have a vaccine for herpes. We don't have a vaccine for HIV. Why? Because viruses mutate.
And I think it goes back to what you were saying before about everyone being different. Everyone has a different microbiome. And so medicine really is not a one-size-fits-all. And I think that's what we've learned from when they used to, with the vaccines years ago, and people would say they worked, but maybe we know more today. And so maybe that's not the best approach to take.
Yeah, and unfortunately, here's the thing. If you look back, in the days of George Washington, when George Washington had a cold, because that's what he died of, an infection, they were removing his blood to treat him. Now you look back at that and you go, oh my God, how barbaric, right? If you remember, there was an episode of Star Trek where Dr. McCoy came and there was a woman that had kidney disease and he would give her this pill and he would say, oh my God, dialysis, how barbaric, right? In the future, there is going to be a pill, and it may be a microbiome consortium, like a bunch of microbes in a pill to restore the kidneys. Right now, we are not seeing that, right? Because we're still in this path of, hey, we have kidney disease, let's give dialysis. And all the nephrologists, all the kidney doctors are basically doing that and treating with dialysis because that's what the guidelines are. That's how they treat. That's how they've been taught to treat. With new technology, again, new science, new research, new data, we change that pattern. And there will be a time where in the future it will not be dialysis and it will be like that pill. And we will be saying, oh, how barbaric. Like when I look at, when I read the treatment for George Washington for a cold, how barbaric to remove blood at a time when you need blood to fight a virus, right? So I think we just have to remain humble in medicine and science. And I think that's what's been lost. There's also needs to be a narrative and a discussion between scientists that are doing the cutting edge research and those in the government level. And it cannot be political. And we need to remove the politicians out of the way because, listen, even the politicians are going to need doctors. Even the politicians are going to be patients at some point. Don't bias research because it's going to affect you. It's going to affect all of us. When I stood during the pandemic looking at the data, clearly helping one patient after another, understanding why did I help this patient, why didn't I help that patient, knowing the microbiome, seeing the microbiome of those patients. I did it with open eyes, not to be biased because it helped me. You understand? It helps me survive. So we cannot be biased. Mm-hmm. We have to stay the course of wanting to explore and to be humble, to know we don't know. Listen, I'm saying this whole thing with bifidobacteria, but then some smart scientist 5 years, 10 years down the road may say, Dr. Hazan was completely wrong. It wasn't bifidobacteria, it was this bacteria, right? That we don't even have a name for it, right? So as we advance the science, as we advance the technology, as we discover new microbes, we're going to understand better and better. So that's why we shouldn't put ourselves in a rabbit hole to say, this is it, this is the answer. There's no such thing unless you achieve a cure. Achieve a cure and then tell me what you did. And then if I can reproduce that cure, then you're onto something. I always say research needs to be valid, verified, and reproducible. My research where we showed loss of bifidobacteria in COVID, severe COVID patients, was reproduced by 2 different labs in 2 different countries. My research where we showed the vaccines affect the microbiome, specifically the bifidobacteria, was reproduced by 2 different labs in 2 different countries. That makes the research valid, verified, and reproducible. Mm-hmm. Now, when you start with that foundation that the vaccine affects the bifidobacteria, you can look at the vaccine injured, and then you could see, wait a minute, all these people don't have bifidobacteria. What is going on there? And then you say, okay, well, we're going to start with the premise that bifidobacteria is important, right? We all know bifidobacteria is important. There's tons of articles out there. We're going to start, it's your trillion-dollar probiotics. Now we're going to start looking at, well, if bifidobacteria is important, how do we increase bifidobacteria? We increase bifidobacteria with certain products. How do we kill bifidobacteria? What kills bifidobacteria? How do we improve people that have damaged their microbiome? Is it a probiotic? Problem with the probiotics is the majority of probiotics are actually fake. The other problem is some of them are just dead bacteria. The other problem is they could get killed by the acidity in the stomach, or they don't reach the cecum, or for the majority of the time they don't implant. Something is not allowing them to go back. So it's like a forest, and you remove all the trees, and then all of a sudden you want to regrow the trees, but the floor is sand. Well, you're not going to grow trees on sand. You have to change the soil, right? Mm-hmm. So there's multiple layers that are needed to improve, to figure out the answer to fixing the bifidobacteria. But if we don't acknowledge that we have a problem to begin with, we're never going to fix this.
Are you finding that COVID now is affecting the gastrointestinal tract more. I had it for the first time that I know of back in February. And from a respiratory standpoint, it wasn't horrible. It wasn't worse than a regular cold that I've had, but it did impact my gastrointestinal tract. And then when I did research and spoke to other people, a lot of people were having similar problems. Has it transitioned into more of a gastro issue?
I think it was always a gastro issue to begin with, in my opinion. I think it starts in the gut, but that's my opinion. Nobody else's. There's data that we're coming out at Progenabiome that's going to show that it is a gut problem. Everything ends up in the gut. All microbes ends up in the gut. Whether you put something in your face, it goes into the blood vessel, and then that blood vessel travels all the way to the gut. Your gut is essentially your garbage bin, but it's functioning. It's the transmission of a car, in my opinion. So we're going to be showing data on that to demonstrate that it does have, the gut has a huge role and that it does affect. But again, which part of the virus affects? I tend to think it's the spike protein that affects the microbiome. Mm-hmm. But we're going to be having data coming out on that. I welcome anyone to go to the Progenabiome website. We have all our publications there, a lot of podcasts. Everything we've done is there.
And finally, doctor, if someone wants to improve their gut health and improve their immune system, what are some lifestyle changes they can be making? What should they eliminate eating and what can they add in?
Well, I think, first of all, healthy food. Make sure you know your farmer. Make sure you know where your food's coming from. Make sure it doesn't have pesticides on it and that they don't use pesticides. I'm not a fan of corn. Corn is modified, so just get rid of corn. Make sure your vitamin D levels are adequate. Make sure you have the right vitamins. So many vitamins have so many products in there that affects the vitamin absorption. Decrease stress, turn off the radio, turn off the news, listen to things that make you happy. I think all of that helps. We have a tension in this country, and especially before elections, people get heated. The government's not going to be your doctor. When you get sick, the government, the president is not going to be your doctor. So you really need to educate yourself, and you really need to keep yourself in a good zone to decrease the stress, because life is about a balance in the microbiome, balance between the stress and fun. Decrease stress by doing yoga, meditation, and then work hard the rest of the week. You know what I mean? So you need balance in everything. I think we tend to live super high impact, and that's not good.
And doctor, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work or to connect with you, where can they go?
Progenabiome.com, Progena biome, biome.com.
Dr. Hazan, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read our digital articles, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.